Hey guys, good morning. We're going to do something a little bit different today. I decided to go lecture style with a whiteboard, and we'll just see how it goes. I'm just sort of like muddling through. But today we're going to talk about D.A.R.V.O. It's very interesting. There's a lot to learn about toxic, abusive, manipulative, and predatory types of personalities, and then also their tactics, their methods, and the mechanisms that they employ in order to manipulate others, or perhaps shift the focus or shift the blame away from themselves. So we're going to talk about D.A.R.V.O. We're going to talk about Dr. Jennifer Freyd, and I hope that I'm pronouncing that correctly. She's an amazing researcher out of the University of Oregon, and she's done research on the topics of victimization and trauma, and also how perpetrators of abuse and violence respond to being accused of their crimes. Okay, so let's get started. Like I said, Dr. Joe, okay. This is funny because I'm watching myself on the screen, so I'm trying to make sure you guys can see everything, and now I feel like a weather person. Okay, so Jennifer Freyd, PhD from University of Oregon. This is her material, and all you have to do is Google what is D.A.R.V.O, and you will find a lot of great information about her research, including, which we'll talk about in just a second, for just a little bit, not too much in depth, betrayal trauma. A lot of survivors of abuse have endured betrayal trauma. There's also such a thing as institutional betrayal. Institutional betrayal, as we've talked about before, there are things that we see on a small scale in our own lives, in our home, in our relationships, that also take place on a large scale, including on a world stage for the whole world to see. And then we have betrayal blindness, and we have institutional betrayal blindness, and we're going to go over that in just a second. But what does D.A.R.V.O stand for? Okay, so D.A.R.V.O stands for deny, attack, reverse, victim, and offender. I hope you guys can see that. Okay, so deny, attack, reverse, victim, and offender. So what the research on D.A.R.V.O shows is that sexual predators, or people who have been accused of predatory sexual crimes, whether that be rape or molestation, that when they are approached and accused of their crimes, that they use this particular tactic. So we saw, whatever the case may be about guilt or innocence, although there is research that shows that that people who are guilty are the ones that use this tactic. But we can see this tactic in a number of different settings, including with narcissistic and abusive romantic partners, parents, family members, bosses, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to be coming from a sexual offender. It's a tactic that's used by all kinds of manipulative people, which is basically, no, that's not, I didn't do that. Furthermore, you're screwed up for even thinking that in the first place. Furthermore, I'm the victim here, that you would even accuse me of such a thing, and now you all need to feel sorry for me because this is a witch hunt, right? So that's how D.A.R.V.O usually goes. And I'm just going to read from you some of this research here, which you can see on your own if you Google it. But basically, what the technical definition of D.A.R.V.O from Dr. Freyd is, D.A.R.V.O refers to a reaction perpetrators of wrongdoing, particularly sexual offenders, may display in response to being held accountable for their behavior. So, I was going to say that despite, whether someone is guilty or innocent, a good demonstration of this would be the Judge Kavanaugh hearings, where he was being accused of raping Dr. Ford when he was in college. And you can see where he, became very emotional and indignant and angry over how he was being treated. And what happens then is what she calls betrayal blindness. But because you feel sorry for this person now because they're all upset, and it is true that they're being accused, what we will do then is we will take on some self-blame. So that's the other part of her research, is that when a victim experiences D.A.R.V.O, what I mean by that is if I'm a rape survivor and I'm going to confront my rapist and that person uses D.A.R.V.O on me, I am more likely then to blame myself. And I will be more likely to become blind to the truth of the matter. What Dr. Freyd says is that, especially with trauma, because we have multiple systems that are paying attention, right? We have our cognitive prefrontal cortex that is, scanning the scene and having thoughts to help us understand what's happening. We also have our amygdala, which is more of our sensing and instinctive type of thinking going on, right? So it's possible to know what's happening while also not knowing what's happening. And with D.A.R.V.O, it becomes very confusing for everyone, because if you are an empathic survivor of abuse, you don't want to see anyone hurting ever, right? Even your rapist, right? Even your abuser. Will have a tendency to want to see the human qualities in them, and figure out how it is they got the way that they were in order that we can understand them and maybe even possibly forgive them, right? So when someone uses D.A.R.V.O, so now not only are they denying it, but now they're really angry and upset. They're attacking you back, or let's say I'm the rape survivor. Now I'm being attacked. How dare I? I'm destroying his life. What will his children think? His reputation is on the line. And so now I feel bad because here I am disturbing this person's life. And then I'm going to start questioning myself, did it really happen the way that I thought? Maybe I played a part too. Maybe he's not such a bad guy. So now I'm blaming myself, right? I'm blaming myself. And so that's what D.A.R.V.O aims to do, is to shift blame and to take attention away from the actual perpetrator and place it on the victim, or on the institution that is blaming them, okay? All right, so deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender. Again, like I said before, this doesn't have to be an instance where we have someone who's been sexually assaulted. It could be that you asked your teenager if they're smoking pot, and they're like, "Mom, how could you ever think that about me? I'm so hurt that you would think I would do something like that." And so now your mom's like, "Oh, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have accused you of that. You're right. I know you better than that." That's D.A.R.V.O too, right? So it's a tactic. It's a persuasive tactic, a manipulative tactic that people will use to get out of trouble. But the research itself, and this is why we focus more on the sort of sexual predators in this situation, is because that's where the research is based. The research is based on those specific instances of sexual violence or sexual assault, and then what happens in the settings where victims are confronting their abusers or their perpetrators. That's what the research is based. And the research has found that D.A.R.V.O is commonly used by individuals who are confronted, and women were more likely to be exposed to D.A.R.V.O. So if it's a man accusing a man, he's not as likely to invoke D.A.R.V.O. It's usually when a woman is accusing a man. And higher levels of exposure to D.A.R.V.O during a confrontation were associated with increased perceptions of self-blame among the confronters. So that's basically exactly what I just described to you. Now let's talk for a second about betrayal trauma, because while we're on the topic of Dr. Freyd, this is her other area of research that's really interesting. So betrayal trauma has to do with when the person, and we talk about this in our SNAP classes, right? Because this is one of the things that we have in common as survivors of narcissistic and abusive personalities, is we can go back in our past and remember when the people who were supposed to protect us, who were supposed to teach us, support us, and nurture us, were the ones that were harming us. And that is super common among survivors. And that's one of the things that makes us a target for future abuse and future manipulation, is because we've already been betrayed. We've already been betrayed by people who love us or are supposed to love us. We've already been betrayed by our coaches, our teachers. We've been betrayed by our ministers and our priests. These are people that are supposed to watch over us and guard over us and help us. And they oftentimes are the ones that are harming us. And so that's a betrayal trauma, because it's the antithesis of the purpose of that role. And what that person does is they take advantage of having power over you, and they utilize that power over you in order to abuse you and manipulate you into not telling anyone. And then when you tell someone, they're going to do this, right? Okay. So there's such a thing as institutional betrayal. Again, a lot of these topics that we discuss in here are things we can see on a micro level, or these are things we can see on the world stage. It's the same tactics, the same mechanisms, right? So there's such a thing as institutional betrayal. Institutional betrayal is when an institution in itself and its organization and its operation is actually harming or exploiting or abandoning the people that it's supposed to be helping and supporting and protecting. So a good example of this would be, whatever your opinions are on the matter, but an example would be police officers who are abusive. That's a perfect example of institutional betrayal. The police officer is supposed to guard and protect. The police officer is supposed to be a keeper of peace and a protector of the public. And when that person uses, or that institution, or say, for example, that police culture in that particular geographical region, when that police culture is that they are superior entities that are there to punish and control, that's when now we have institutional betrayal, because that's not supposed to be what the police are all about. Another version of institutional betrayal might be scam or scheming, scam type fraudulent colleges, who take your money and run and did not provide the education that you were supposed to receive, right? I think that there's been many cases of that have happened where a fraudulent school will pop up and promise certain results, but then really it's all about just getting your money, and they don't give you the things that they promise. So it's an institution, right, that is exploiting you. And then lastly, we have betrayal blindness, and then of course we have institutional betrayal blindness. This might sort of help us a little bit and understand why it is that people protect abusers, why it is that people have a hard time calling out injustice for what it is. And we see a lot of explaining away of really bad behaviors going on, and this sort of strange acceptance of injustice. And then, oh my gosh, how many times do you see the abusers or the perpetrators themselves being rallied? People are rallying for them. Wasn't it Snoop Dogg recently was rallying for Bill Cosby, you know, and that makes me wonder about Snoop Dogg now, because abusers stick together, they protect each other. So why is he defending Bill Cosby? Anyhow, so what happens is, let's say you love Snoop Dogg, right? Which I was in high school in the 90s, and, you know, we listened to that, and I know every word, right, to one of his albums that I won't say out loud. And now that I see his behavior current day and think about the lyrics, well, yeah, of course, right? Of course. And, you know, because I study what I study and I am interested in what I do in this practice in a clinical sense, I can recognize it. But part of me wants to ignore it. Part of me wants to ignore the fact that there's a possibility, it's more than a possibility, I would assume, that Snoop Dogg is not actually a good person, despite the schools that he's opened up, despite all the philanthropic things that he's done. You know, part of me wants to ignore that Bill Cosby did those things because I grew up watching him on TV. I want to ignore it, right? Because it makes my life, I can still live in La La Land and pretend like that these things aren't there. And then also, furthermore, I don't have to do anything about them. So we wind up becoming blind to things because I mean, how hard is it to admit that your mother doesn't love you? I mean, how hard is it to admit that your father sexually assaulted you through your childhood, and no one, you know, cares in your family? Like, it's really hard to, you know, embrace those truths. It's actually much easier for us to ignore those things. And a lot of us do that. Society does it. The legal system does it too. So there's this sort of betrayal blindness because you want to protect the person that you love. You want to protect the coach. You want to protect the teacher because people like them. And not everything was bad, right? There's been times when good things happened. I recently watched, and again, these things go on in multiple different types of settings. So cults would be another place where these things happen. On Netflix, there is a documentary about Bikram Yoga, who was the supposed inventor of hot yoga, which he wasn't. And you know, there are people that he changed their life for the better. He inspired them and gave them purpose, and they loved him. Michael Jackson, the same. There's a really great, and I think it's on HBO, there's a good documentary about Michael Jackson where he did all kinds of really nice things for these families of these boys. And they loved him, and he was kind. So this type of abuse isn't some back alley dumpster rape, right? This is someone who people like and that they will rise to defend them. And you're going to want to defend them too. And that's the problem, is that we're not willing to face the truth. And then as an individual, if I decide I want to confront my abuser, or if I want to confront my rapist, I got to deal with all of this, all of it, on top of everything else, on top of the trauma, the PTSD, on top of my reputation being completely destroyed. And then don't forget this, right? So I'm going to get attacked. I'm going to be called a slut or a whore. I'm going to be called that I'm attention seeking, you know, and so now I'm the bad guy. And I don't want to be the bad guy. I just want for justice to be done, right? So anyway, this is a good representation of the types of things that go on with survivors of abuse. When we're going back and looking at the different incidents that took place throughout that person's life, we see a lot of evidence of these things going on. And if this is something that's going on in your life, in your history, that's something to be examined and also to be on the lookout for. And that can help us avoid abusive and manipulative people in the future, predatory people in the future. But sometimes they're sitting right next to us and we don't even know it, right? So the major point that I'm trying to make is just that if we can be more aware of the types of manipulative tactics that we're seeing as they're happening, then we'll be able to step outside of that emotionally and go, oh, these are the facts. These are observable facts. Yes, I care for that person. Yes, I feel emotionally attached to them. I can have both, right? Remember, Dr. Freyd said that you can know and not know at the same time. Abusers can be kind. They can be philanthropic. You can have actual, genuine emotional attachment to them because it wasn't all bad, right? So they're not all bad or all good. It's that you can be doing all kinds of good things and still be a rapist and still be a molester. And that means you have to go to jail. That means that you should be prosecuted and you should go to prison. Just because you're famous or because you're talented doesn't mean that you should be able to escape justice. And that doesn't matter if you're a teacher, a rap star, the president of the United States, or anyone. No one should be exempt from having to serve time or receive punishment for sexual assault or sexual crimes just because it embarrasses the perpetrator. Okay? All right. I hope that you have a good day, and I will see you next Wednesday. Thanks. Bye.